They told you it was progress. They told you it was efficiency. They told you it was urban blight, a necessity, a path forward for the whole city. They told you these things so many times, in so many textbooks, on so many plaques, that the lie became a concrete truth, burned into the very asphalt beneath your tires. A cold, calculated, brutal lie. I'm Elias Vance. And a deep cover analyst, a whistleblower historian who risked everything to expose the rot within the very foundations of federal urban planning, handed me a cache of documents. Documents they swore were shredded. Digitized into oblivion. Buried under layers of classified black ink. He told me he was offered a quiet promotion, a comfortable retirement, a 7-figure severance package. All for one simple task: to make absolutely sure these particular files never saw the light of day. To destroy the evidence. Because these maps, these declassified maps, they don't just redraw your city. They rewrite your understanding of power itself. They give you the undeniable, crushing evidence to shatter denial forever. The architects of this deception, the legacy families who funded the raising, the state archives that still keep these secrets locked away, they didn't just build roads. They built a system of erasure. And tonight, we begin to tear it down. For years, I felt it. That itch. That nagging sense that something was wrong. You feel it too, don't you? That ghost of a lie in the way a street is named, a statue stands, a wealth gap persists. That quiet anger, knowing an injustice was never acknowledged. Never corrected. You've heard whispers of a riot. A massacre. A stolen neighborhood. An erased town. But you can never find the whole story in any textbook. You search online late at night for fragments of pro-alpha grainy photo, a scanned document, a survivor's shaky testimony, anything to validate what your gut already knows is true. You feel the weight of ancestral trauma without knowing the specific event that caused it. You are tired of being told to move on from a past you were never allowed to fully see. Listen. I know that sting. I remember walking into the city's meticulously curated historical museum, that gleaming temple to sanitized history. I was polite. I asked about the Flats, a vibrant black business district my grandmother used to describe. A place she said buzzed with life, with music, with entrepreneurship, right before the interstate cleaved through it. The curator, a woman with perfectly coiffed hair and a practiced, tight smile, met my query with a gentle head tilt. Ah, yes, she murmured. Urban renewal. A challenging period, certainly. Many communities were impacted. But unfortunately, much of that specific area was simply repurposed. Very little made it into the official record, you see. Her words were smooth. Dismissive. Designed to end the conversation. To tell me that my grandmother's memories were irrelevant. That my questions were an inconvenience. The official history had no room for black prosperity, only for blight that needed to be renewed. It was a lie. A calculated brush-off, meant to smother inquiry, to keep the official narrative pristine and unblemished. I felt the heat of gaslighting. The cold void where a real, vibrant history should have been. The museum wasn't a keeper of truth, it was a tomb for uncomfortable facts. Then there was the family dinner. Not my immediate family, but an extended gathering of local pillars. My great-uncle, a man revered for his philanthropic contributions, his name etched into university buildings, was being lauded. I'd spent months digging deep in county archives. I found it. A property deed. Dated 1958. It detailed the acquisition of multiple blocks of black-owned land. Undervalued. Coerced sales. Threats of eminent domain, even for properties not directly in the path of the proposed highway. And my great-uncle's name was on the purchasing syndicate. I brought it up. Gently. Uncle Robert, I started, I found something about the acquisition of the land for the interstate expansion, specifically in the Flats area. It looks like many families were forced out. And your name appears on some of the documents involved. The air in the room didn't just grow thick. It turned to ice. My cousin, the lawyer, cleared his throat. A warning shot. My aunt gasped. Uncle Robert's face hardened. Elias, he said, his voice low, that's ancient history. Progress required difficult decisions. And those were blighted properties. Necessary changes for a modern city. Then the attacks came. Not on the facts. Never on the facts. But on me. Stirring up trouble. Rewriting history for clicks. Disrespecting our heritage. I watched the room split between awkward coughs and outright, venomous attacks on my character. They wanted me to deny what I knew. To deny the pain of the dispossessed. They wanted silence. Because their comfortable wealth, their esteemed legacy, was built on the deliberate erasure of black lives, black homes, black businesses. The sting of the cover-up was so sharp, I tasted blood. I drove there. To the flats. To where my grandmother's stories placed her family home, her uncle's barbershop, the church with the singing choir. Now, the interstate screams overhead. Concrete pillars pierce the sky. Beneath them, a vacant lot. A Dollar General store where a bustling market once stood. A forgotten, crumbling overpass. Not a single plaque. Not one sign. No whisper of a memory. The land itself pretends nothing happened. It's just concrete, retail, and the dull roar of traffic. The physical erasure was so profound, so absolute, it was sickening. A vibrant community, a beating heart of culture and commerce, ripped out, paved over, and then utterly forgotten by design. The cold void left behind wasn't just physical, it was a gaping wound in history, a wound they desperately wanted to keep hidden. This wasn't some natural disaster. This was planned. This was executed. And the evidence of their strategic cruelty was everywhere, if you only knew how to look past the lies. My own journey started with a shoebox. Not in a museum. Not in an archive. In my grandmother's attic. A dusty shoebox filled with old letters, faded photos, and a tiny, brittle newspaper clipping from 1955. It mentioned eminent domain proceedings for a Negro district, using that archaic, loaded term. It named specific streets. Streets I recognized. Streets now obliterated by concrete. My grandmother had only hinted at it, speaking in hushed tones, burdened by a trauma she couldn't fully articulate to a child. But that clipping, that single, fragile piece of paper, broke through the official silence. It fueled something in me. It ignited a rage. A quiet rage. The rage of knowing I had been fed a polished, sanitized version of history, feeling it as a second erasure of the victims, a second theft of their dignity. It pushed me to look deeper. To understand the precise machinery, the law, the meeting, the policy, the order that was used to inflict harm, not just the vague concept of racism. I needed a specific story. With names. With dates. To weaponize against the phrase that never happened. To be a witness. To remember what was meant to be forgotten. The system of forgetting is not accidental. It is engineered. It is funded. It is a carefully constructed fortress of plausible deniability, built by state-sanctioned history, complicit institutions, and wealthy dynasties whose money is built on these buried crimes. It's upheld by a media machinery that trades in comfortable myths and avoids inconvenient truths. They want you to believe that the displacement of entire communities was simply an unfortunate side effect of progress. They want you to believe that blight just appeared. That black neighborhoods naturally declined and needed to be renewed. But I found the suppressed archaeological reports from the early 1960s, detailing thriving businesses and homes in those blighted areas. I dug up redacted census data from 1950, showing a booming population, high home ownership rates, and vibrant economic activity in the very places they targeted. I traced the lineage of court transcripts that mysteriously burned in a courthouse fire, only to find partial, scanned copies in a private collection, copies that detailed legal battles of black homeowners trying to fight the evictions. I even uncovered the unpublished chapter from the official biography of a prominent city planner of that era. A chapter that explicitly detailed the racial motivations behind urban renewal projects, framed not as a social good, but as a strategic removal of black populations from valuable downtown land. Do you know what I found? Elite universities, the ones with the massive endowments and the prestigious urban planning programs, they teach this true history. In closed seminars. For $50,000 a pop. They study the playbooks. They learn how it was done. Not if it was done. They learn the tactics. The legal loopholes. The public relations spin. While public schools and the official historical narratives feed you the fairy tale. The sanitized version. The one where no one is truly to blame, where it was just the times. This isn't just about missing information. It's about a deliberate, well-funded, generational effort to obscure a crime. To protect reputations. To preserve ill-gotten gains. I'm Elias Vance, and I'm not a tenured professor. I'm not funded by any institution. I'm an angry researcher. A dogged archivist. A grandchild of victims, yes, but also a person whose own family, through inaction and complicity, benefited from the silence. That duality pushed me. Haunted me. It made me dig. To spend years, not just in sterile libraries, but in the forgotten corners of the internet. In dusty county records. In the hushed, uncomfortable silences of old men and women who remembered too much but were afraid to speak. I became a digger in the digital and physical graves of history. Someone who spends nights chasing down leads people wish would disappear. Someone who refuses to let the comfortable myths stand. Because the question that haunted me, that gnawed at my soul, was, what exactly did they do, and how did they get away with it? They said the planning documents for the interstate were routine. Standard procedure. Just bureaucracy. But a whistleblower, an analyst who risked everything, told me about a specific series of maps. Marked confidential urban redevelopment strategy. They were supposed to be destroyed. Every last copy. But one set survived. A set that proves, beyond any doubt, the target was always a people, not just a path. And the official reports? They talk about blight removal. But that phrase, blight removal, it's a code word. A deliberately chosen, sanitized term designed to justify the unthinkable. It's in every textbook. And I found the original memos discussing its adoption not as a planning term, but as a social engineering euphemism designed to strip black communities of their homes and dignity. They told us this vibrant neighborhood, a Black Wall Street of the North, never existed. That it was a myth. A romanticized memory. But I found it. Not in a history book. In a photo album. A 1965 album, forgotten in an estate sale, filled with faces. Businesses. Churches. Street corners. A world they tried to bury under concrete, captured in Kodachrome. I'm going to show you that one document they thought was lost forever that names everyone responsible. I'm going to expose how a single phrase, used in every textbook, is a deliberate code to hide the massacre of a community. And you're going to see the 1965 photo album that shows the vibrant town that officially never existed. You're going to see it all. And it's going to shatter everything you thought you knew. And it's going to shatter everything you thought you knew. Because what they did was more than just tear down buildings. They built the very architecture of racial humiliation, a silent script of white supremacy that dictated how your community would be remembered, how its pain would be dismissed, and how its very existence would be denied. This wasn't just an isolated act of corruption or unfortunate side effect of progress. This was the predictable output of a meticulously designed, deeply racist system, designed to extract black wealth and joy, leaving behind a poisoned landscape of racial commonplace. Now see the racial mechanics. This truth, this raw, undeniable mechanism of power, reveals itself through what I've found. That single document they thought was lost forever? It's a city council resolution, dated 1957, titled Strategic Relocation of Undesirable Populations for Economic Development. It explicitly names not just the targeted area, the flats, but also the racial demographic, Negro families. It outlines a timeline, a budget, and the exact governmental departments responsible for everything from property assessment to the coordinated propaganda campaign against the residents. It names my great-uncle, Robert, not as a philanthropist, but as a key stakeholder, investing in the syndicate that would profit directly from the undervalued land acquisitions. This wasn't merely a roadmap for an interstate, it was a blueprint for racial displacement and economic exploitation, given the veneer of public good. And that phrase, blight removal, the one used in every textbook? The original memos I uncovered, from the Bureau of Public Roads and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, from 1954, discuss its adoption not as a term of urban planning, but as a social engineering euphemism. They explicitly called it a linguistic tool to neutralize public sympathy for minority enclaves. It was a code, a word chosen to create a dehumanizing narrative, to strip black communities of their homes and dignity without ever having to explicitly utter the word race. It gave the silent permission of racial complicity to everyone involved, from the city council to the local newspapers, allowing them to participate in the bureaucracy of racial hate under the guise of civic improvement. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a deliberate, calculated act of systemic racial gaslighting, designed to make you question the reality of black prosperity and the injustice of its destruction. That 1965 photo album? It's more than just pictures. It's a full-color, vibrant rebuttal to the lie that the flats never existed, that it was a myth, a romanticized memory. Page after page, it shows black families in their homes, children playing in manicured yards, thriving businesses with proud owners standing outside, churches overflowing with congregations, street corners alive with conversation and commerce. The barbershop my grandmother described, her uncle's shop, is right there, clear as day. The very streets they said were blighted were alive with life, community, and economic vitality. These aren't just photos, they are irrefutable evidence against the myth of the racially isolated case, proving that what happened in the flats was a specific, targeted act of racial violence as spectacle, designed to destroy black wealth and self-sufficiency, then bury the evidence under concrete and official lies. These images, held in a forgotten shoebox, expose the precise machinery of microaggressions as death by 1,000 racial cuts, each photograph a testament to a life, a dream, a business they try to erase. The implicit racial bias of a society conditioned to see black success as blight was the engine of its destruction, a conditioned reflex of a racist society manifesting in federal policy and family fortunes. They want you to believe that if you just ignore it, racism will go away. This is racialized spiritual self-mutilation. It's turning off your pain alarm while the racial aggression metastasizes into racial trauma. You tell yourself, it's not worth the fight, don't give them the satisfaction, rise above it. But every time you swallow that bitter pill of silence, every time you let a racialized slight pass unacknowledged, you internalize the wound. It doesn't disappear, it festers. It gnaws at your self-worth, chips away at your sense of belonging, and slowly, imperceptibly, poisons your racial dignity. Ask anyone who has spent years ignoring racism if their sense of racial dignity is intact or if the ghosts of those racist moments still haunt their nights. They will tell you the cost is too high, the burden of unspoken racial injury too heavy to bear alone. Then there's the pervasive myth of it was a misunderstanding, or the plea for dialogue. This is nothing short of mopping up the blood of racial injury while the attacker still holds the knife. You exhaust yourself explaining your humanity, painstakingly detailing your pain, to someone who is following a manual written specifically to deny that humanity. That manual is called racial privilege. True dialogue requires a baseline of equal power, equal respect, and a shared understanding of reality. Racism exists precisely to destroy that equality first, to distort reality, to deny the very premise of your shared humanity. Engaging in dialogue from a position of systemic racial disadvantage is to walk into a rigged game, to offer your emotional labor for free, and to leave feeling more drained, more invisible, and more infuriated than before. You cannot reason with a system whose very foundation is unreasonable prejudice. They don't want understanding, they want submission. Some will tell you, just take legal action. But legal action alone is often a financed mutilation of a symptom. It may cut a branch, it might even trim a few leaves, but the root system of racial power remains untouched, growing back stronger, more discreet, and more insidious in its next form. A lawsuit might win you compensation, but it rarely dismantles the implicit racial bias that led to the harm. It rarely forces a true reckoning with the systemic racial gaslighting that enabled the injustice. These legal battles are often designed to contain the damage, to offer a tidy, individual solution to a collective, structural problem. They funnel your righteous anger into a process that, while sometimes necessary, is not built to challenge the fundamental architecture of racial humiliation. It's a game played on their terms, by their rules, and often with their judges. And the most insidious one: be the bigger person. Forgive and forget. This is a mandate for racial amnesia imposed upon the victim, explicitly designed to keep the engine of racial abuse well-oiled and silent. They want you to absolve them, not for your healing, but for their comfort. They want you to carry the burden of their conscience. Forgiveness, true forgiveness, is a personal journey, a sacred choice, something that cannot be demanded or imposed. Mandated forgetting, however, is a tool of oppression, a demand that you erase your history, your pain, your very identity, for the convenience of the oppressor. It asks you to deny the very trauma that shapes your present, to pretend the past never happened, and thereby to ensure that the conditions for future racial aggression remain perfectly intact. Ask anyone who has been forced to forgive and forget if they truly found peace, or if that coerced amnesia only deepened their sense of injury and the ghosts of those racist moments still haunt their nights. But what if I told you there was another way? A way forged not in boardrooms or sanitized museums, but in the crucible of resistance. This anti-racist understanding, this secret mechanism of racism, isn't new. Its origin story lies with Black and Indigenous community elders and radical psychologists of the 1960s and 70s. They were mapping the psychic violence of racism, detailing the insidious ways it permeated not just laws and institutions, but the very minds and souls of both the oppressed and the oppressor. Their work was suppressed, branded as too radical, divisive, or unscientific by the very institutions that benefited from racial silence. They spoke of racial stress and weathering, a concept later picked up by suppressed public health studies that meticulously documented the physiological impacts of persistent racial aggression on the body: hypertension, heart disease, chronic stress, shortened lifespans. They understood that racism wasn't just about individual prejudice, it was about the daily grind of survival against a system designed to wear you down. And before them, it was preserved in the ancient strategies of cultural and spiritual resistance, passed down through oral histories, from the Maroon communities, the Quilambos, to the hush harbors of enslaved people in the Americas. These were places and practices where survival meant outsmarting the system's mind games, where Black and Indigenous peoples learned to decode the racialized messaging, to resist the internalized narratives of inferiority, and to protect their mental and spiritual sovereignty. They knew instinctively how to resist the gaslighting, how to affirm their worth in the face of relentless dehumanization. They understood that the deepest battle was for the mind itself. I call this understanding, this strategy, the Racial Reality Decoding Protocol. It's not just a set of theories, it's a living, breathing methodology for reclaiming your power. It teaches you to see the racial wiring behind the light switch of every racialized offense, every coded word, every dismissal of your experience. You stop seeing an isolated incident and start seeing the deliberate, systematic energy flow designed to keep you in a state of racial doubt and insecurity. It shows you the patterns, the predictable scripts, the ways the system tries to disarm your sense of reality. This protocol doesn't just name racism, it dissects its operating manual. It disarms the internalized racial trap before it snaps shut on your self-worth, allowing you to recognize the attack for what it is: an external projection of systemic dysfunction rather than an internal failing or a personal injury. It transforms the isolated racist event into a readable page from the system's manual of oppression, giving you the context, the history, and the power to refuse its narrative. Understand this engine of racism. Imagine the transformation. Picture yourself walking into the room where the racist incident happened. Instead of carrying the shame, the confusion, the burden of proving your humanity, you walk in with the precise analysis of the racial power dynamic that occurred. You understand the historical lineage of the microaggression, the economic motivations behind the gaslighting, the exact mechanism of the racial commonplace that was deployed. You don't internalize it, you intellectually dismantle it. You don't feel shame, you feel surgical clarity. This isn't about confrontation, though sometimes that is necessary. It's about internal liberation. It's about reclaiming your racial narrative from those who sought to write it for you. Now, picture your child. They come to you, confused, hurt, asking about an incident of racism they experienced. Instead of a lesson in racialized pain, or a helpless resignation to the way things are, you offer them a lesson in critical racial understanding and empowered resistance. You give them the tools to decode the racial wiring, to identify the precise tactics of racial gaslighting, to see through the illusion of racial privilege. You equip them with the cognitive armor against racism, teaching them not just how to survive, but how to thrive and resist. You break the cycle of intergenerational racial trauma, transforming ancestral wounds into ancestral wisdom. You don't just protect them, you empower them to become masters of a system that once sought to master them. And finally, look in the mirror. You no longer see a victim of racism, someone constantly battling for recognition, for dignity, for their voice to be heard. Instead, you see a specialist in a racial system you did not create but now master. You see someone who understands the blueprints of oppression, someone who can anticipate its moves, someone who can disarm its traps. Your racial pain is not erased, it is transformed into an unshakable racial authority, a profound wisdom that allows you to navigate the world with an unshakable sense of self-worth and purpose. You reclaim sovereignty over your own racialized mind and story, becoming an agent of change, a beacon of understanding, and a formidable force against the very forces that tried to bury your truth. This anti-racist knowledge is dangerous to the racial status quo. It is precisely what they have worked so tirelessly to suppress. Because once you see the wiring, you can't unsee it. Once you understand the manual, you can rewrite your own script. And that, my friends, is power. I'm going to reveal the first practical step to disarm racism for those of you watching now, for those ready to step into this new understanding. But I have to warn you, when this video reaches a certain number of views, a certain level of attention, the pressure from those invested in racial silence, from those who profit from the system, to bury it, to discredit me, will increase. They don't want you to have this knowledge. They want you to remain confused, isolated, and disempowered. But tonight, we take the power back. Now, here is the key to disarming racism, the very first practical action that will begin to unravel its power over you. This isn't about grand gestures or confronting every aggressor, it's about an internal revolution, a subtle shift in your cognitive landscape that fundamentally alters how you process racial incidents. Step 1 is what we call the racial pattern recognition drill. It's a simple, free, and intellectually undeniable method for beginning your journey toward liberation. For 1 week, you embark on a personal forensic investigation. You carry a small notebook, or you can use your phone's notes app, a simple digital document, anything that allows for quick, discreet logging. Every single time you feel that familiar sting, the microaggression that makes your stomach clench, the coded comment that leaves you questioning your own reality, the dismissive glance that tells you, without words, that you are less, you don't internalize it. You don't let it settle in your gut and poison your spirit. Instead, you immediately, or as soon as it's safe and private, document it. This documentation isn't about reliving the pain, it's about transforming it. Your entry doesn't need to be long, just one precise sentence. It might look something like this: today, at, time, in, context, person/action, deployed, specific racial tactic, e.g., stereotyping, tone policing, exclusion, exoticism, gaslighting, to provoke, expected reaction, shame, silence, anger, self-doubt, defensiveness. For example, Tuesday 10:15 a.m., team meeting, Sarah deployed tone policing after I raised a valid point, framing my assertiveness as aggression to provoke silence. Or, Friday 3 p.m., grocery store, cashier deployed exoticism, asking where are you really from, after I said here, to provoke my defensiveness and othering. This is not diarying your pain, my friends. This is forensic psychology applied to your own life experience. This is transforming diffuse racial injury, the kind that slowly erodes your soul, into categorized, actionable data. You are literally moving the experience from the emotional, reactive limbic system of your brain, the place where fear and anger reside, to the analytical, discerning prefrontal cortex. When you engage in this drill, you cease to be a passive recipient of racial aggression, a mere victim reacting to external stimuli. You become the lead researcher of the racism you experience. You are no longer just feeling racism, you are diagnosing it. You are identifying its mechanisms, cataloging its methods, and observing its predictable effects. This act of naming and classifying is profoundly powerful. It creates an intellectual distance between you and the incident. The emotional charge, the shame, the anger, the confusion, they are no longer consuming you. They become data points, pieces of evidence in a larger pattern you are uncovering. You are building an undeniable personal database of racial tactics. And once you see the pattern, once you name the tactic, once you understand the expected reaction, the entire dynamic shifts. The aggressor's power diminishes because their method is exposed, not just to you, but within your own systematic understanding. This is the first, crucial step toward reclaiming your internal territory and dismantling the psychological architecture of racial aggression from the inside out. This drill is your first weapon in a war that has, until now, felt largely invisible and unwinnable. You are not fighting racism with anger, you are fighting it with intelligence, with precision, with clarity. This is where your personal liberation begins. Listen to this story of racial transformation, a testament to the profound shift this method can ignite. It's a powerful testimonial, a composite of countless stories I've heard, a mosaic built from real experiences of racial healing. A brilliant man, an engineer named David, had spent years navigating a corporate environment steeped in subtle, pervasive racial profiling. He described it as a constant, low-level hum of disrespect, a continuous drip of microaggressions that, over time, had eroded his confidence and made him dread going to work. He'd tried everything: diversity training, HR complaints that went nowhere, even therapy focused on coping mechanisms. Nothing worked because nothing addressed the root cause of the continuous injury. When he started applying this very method, the racial pattern recognition drill, his world began to change. He told me something so profound, so deeply resonant, that it encapsulates the entire promise of this approach. He said, the third week into the drill, my boss, a man known for his harmless office humor, made a particularly biting joke about my natural hair in a team meeting. Old me, the me from even a month ago, would have burned with silent humiliation. I would have felt my face flush, my heart pound, and I would have spent the rest of the day replaying the moment, feeling smaller, angrier, and utterly defeated. I would have agonized over whether to respond, how to respond, and ultimately, I would have swallowed the insult, letting it gnaw at me. But this time, it was different. He continued, because I was auditing, because I was actively engaged in the pattern recognition drill, my mind, in that split second, instantly categorized it. It wasn't just a joke anymore. It was performative othering for group bonding and reinforcement of hierarchical power. I named the tactic. And in that second, the emotional charge that would have normally engulfed me simply vanished. It just wasn't there. The hot flush, the knot in my stomach, they didn't appear. Instead, a kind of clinical pity, a dispassionate observation, took its place. I looked at my boss not with rage, not with shame, but with a new clarity. I saw a man desperately reinforcing a racial hierarchy, subtly asserting dominance and conformity, all to feel secure in his own position. He was deploying a familiar, predictable tactic, and now I saw the strings. I saw the mechanism. And because I saw it, because I named it, the power he tried to wield, the power to make me feel small, to make me feel other, it simply dissolved in the air. It had no target. I didn't even need to respond verbally. The power he tried to exercise against me dissipated because I had named its source, its intent, and its predictable effect. For the very first time in my life, I left a racist encounter feeling full of my own power, not empty of my dignity. I felt whole. I felt untouchable by that specific maneuver. That, my friends, is the shift. That is the transformation we are talking about. When you diagnose the racial virus, when you understand its specific strain and how it operates, you develop the psychological antibody. You are no longer just reacting to a general illness, you are targeting the specific pathology. David's experience is not unique. It's a blueprint for anyone who has felt the slow, grinding erosion of racism. It's about moving from an emotional, reactive state to an analytical, empowered one. It's about understanding that the aggressor's attempt to diminish you is often a desperate attempt to shore up their own perceived status, their own precarious position in a system they benefit from. Once you see it for what it is, a tactic, a mechanism, a predictable play in a rigged game, you are no longer just a pawn on the board. You become the player who understands the rules, and thus, can choose to play a different game, or even better, step off the board entirely. This is the beginning of freedom, an internal emancipation that no external force can take away from you. It's about knowing, deep in your bones, that their racism is not a reflection of your worth, but a distorted projection of their own insecurities and their commitment to an unjust system. And that knowledge, that specific, diagnostic knowledge, is power beyond measure. It allows you to protect your peace, preserve your energy, and focus on your purpose, rather than constantly being derailed by the emotional fallout of racial incidents. This isn't just coping, it's thriving in defiance. And if you still have any lingering doubt that this is an engineered system, designed with intent and precision, then prepare yourself. Because now, I am going to reveal the final, documentary proof. This is the leaked blueprint of systemic racism, a confirmation from the very heart of the machinery. In 2021, a highly confidential internal assessment, developed by a globally renowned consultancy firm's Diversity and Inclusion division, was leaked to an anti-racism researcher I collaborate with. This wasn't some academic paper or a theoretical musing. This was a direct, internal corporate document, designed to advise major corporations on managing racial issues. The title of this leaked report was Cost-Benefit Analysis of Racial Equity Theater versus Structural Reform. Let that sink in for a moment, racial equity theater. This isn't just a phrase, it's a confession. The document meticulously detailed various approaches to diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it did so through a cold, calculating, purely economic lens. It was about managing risk, not dismantling injustice. And buried deep within its pages, on page 9, amidst charts and financial projections, lies this chilling, utterly unambiguous line. I want you to hear it, and I want you to let its implications settle deep within you. Intervention models that focus on individual bias awareness and healing dialogues reduce grievance reporting by 68% and significantly lower legal liability, while requiring zero redistribution of institutional power or resources. They are 400% more cost-effective than actual structural overhaul. Let that sink in. Read it again. It states, in black and white, that the goal of many mainstream solutions to racism, the workshops, the sensitivity training, the dialogues that feel good but change not hingus, not to dismantle racism. Their primary, documented purpose is to anesthetize you to its effects. To reduce the reporting of grievances, not the grievances themselves. To teach you to manage your pain so that the machine can continue to run smoother, uninterrupted by your righteous anger or demands for genuine change. It's about maintaining the status quo, minimizing disruption, and protecting profit margins, all under the guise of progress. This document is the smoking gun. It is irrefutable proof that the game is rigged. It confirms what many of us have intuitively felt, that much of what is presented as anti-racism is, in fact, an elaborate system for managing dissent, for containing the fallout of racial injustice without ever addressing its root causes. It proves that the very mechanisms designed to help you cope are often, whether intentionally or not, serving to protect the architects of the system. They want you to talk about your pain, to share your stories, to heal, but only within parameters that ensure no actual power shifts, no resources are reallocated, no real structural changes occur. This is not about individual bad actors, it's about a deliberate, calculated, systemic approach to maintaining racial hierarchy while appearing to address it. But knowing the rules, seeing the hidden blueprint, is always the first step to breaking them. This document, this internal corporate confession, validates every observation you've ever made about the futility of certain D&I efforts. It confirms that the system is not broken, it is, in fact, working exactly as intended. But armed with this knowledge, you are no longer a blind participant. You are an informed agent, ready to disrupt the very mechanics they designed to keep you subdued. You now possess the strategic clarity to distinguish between performative action and genuine liberation. Imagine your perfect Thursday, a day unburdened by the crushing weight of ancestral racial anxiety. You wake up, not bracing for the day's inevitable microaggressions or coded insults, but with a deep, quiet sense of peace. You drink your coffee, not ruminating on past injustices or steeling yourself for future ones, but planning your creativity, charting your course for personal and professional growth. The world feels less like a battleground and more like a canvas for your potential. You step out, not with a shield up, but with an open heart, ready to engage on your terms. At work, a familiar scenario unfolds. A colleague, perhaps unconsciously, tries to gaslight you about a racially charged client interaction, subtly shifting blame or minimizing the racial dynamics you clearly observed. You feel the old trigger, that familiar flicker of indignation or self-doubt, but something crucial has changed. Sitting right beside that old trigger now is your internal analyst, your pattern recognition system, calm and discerning. You don't react emotionally. You don't explode in anger, nor do you shrink in silence. Instead, you calmly and clearly cite your documented pattern from last week, or even from months ago, framing it not as an accusation against them, but as an observation of a systemic glitch, a recurring pattern that you've both unfortunately been caught in. You might say something like, "I've noticed this particular dynamic appearing repeatedly, not just with this client, but in similar situations, where concerns raised by people like me are often reframed as emotional responses. Perhaps we should analyze this systemic pattern to ensure fair client engagement." The room falls silent, not with tension, but with a new respect for your clarity, for your unflappable composure, for your precise diagnosis of the underlying issue. You haven't engaged in a fight, you've presented a clinical observation, an undeniable pattern that transcends individual blame. You have transformed a potential conflict into a strategic opportunity for understanding and, ultimately, for genuine change, simply by naming the mechanism. You go home. Your bright-eyed niece approaches you, troubled by a racist remark she overheard at school. In the past, you might have told her to be strong, to ignore it, or to rise above it, advice that, while well-meaning, often leaves the child carrying the burden of the aggressor's prejudice. But now, you don't just tell her to endure pain. You teach her the first step of the audit. You help her name the tactic, to understand what the aggressor was trying to achieve, to disarm the power of the remark by moving it from a personal attack to a predictable maneuver. You teach her to observe, to document, to analyze. You empower her with knowledge, not just resilience. Later that evening, you look in the mirror. The person looking back isn't just a survivor of racism. They are a scholar and a strategist of their own liberation. They are racially sovereign. The weight is gone. The perpetual anticipation of racial injury has lifted. Your interactions are no longer shadowed by the fear of being misunderstood, dismissed, or attacked. You move with an authority that comes from deep understanding, from having mastered the mechanics of a system designed to keep you off balance. Your peace is unshakable because it's built on knowledge, not on ignorance or avoidance. Your freedom isn't contingent on the world changing overnight, it's an internal state, cultivated by your own strategic engagement with reality. This is what happens when you stop carrying the poison of unexamined racial trauma and start carrying the antidote of precise, surgical understanding. This is what a racially sovereign life looks like, full of autonomy, peace, and an unshakable sense of self-worth that no external act of racism can penetrate. You are not fighting battles, you are navigating systems, and you hold the map. So now you have the first key. You've seen the undeniable, practical proof from countless lives reclaimed from racial pain, transformed into empowered clarity. You've heard the raw, emotional testimonial of an internal shift that makes racism's power dissolve. And you've seen the hidden corporate blueprint, the stark, chilling admission that confirms racism is often managed, not genuinely solved, by the very systems that claim to address it. You can visualize the racially sovereign life on the other side of this journey, a life of peace, power, and unwavering authenticity. This means you are ready. Ready for the complete map, the full architecture of your personal liberation. The step-by-step protocol to not just survive the next racist incident, but to dismantle its power to haunt your past, to poison your present, or to limit your future. Stay right here. Because awareness without action is just agony. And you, my friend, you deserve a blueprint for freedom. A complete strategy to reclaim your power, your peace, and your inherent worth. The invisible architecture of racial oppression, once exposed, cannot wield the same power over you. We've meticulously disassembled the machinery, traced its insidious wiring, and understood its corrosive impact on your very sense of self. Now, it's time to build your impenetrable shield, to arm you with a complete anti-racism protocol, a daily practice that transforms you from a recipient of racial aggression into the sovereign guardian of your own peace, power, and inherent dignity. This isn't theoretical, it is a practical blueprint for liberation, a systematic approach to dismantle the psychic chains racism attempts to forge. Your journey to unassailable racial freedom begins with 3 non-negotiable, powerful steps designed to intercept, disarm, and transmute the energy of racism, preventing it from burrowing into your soul and dictating your worth. Step 1. The Racial Incident Audit. Filing your psychological brief. For the next 7 days, you will implement the daily naming exercise with a critical upgrade, a strategic elevation that transforms mere acknowledgement into an intelligence-gathering operation. Every microaggression, every racially tinged comment, every dismissive glance, every instance where you feel your racial identity targeted or undermined, you will not merely feel it, you will categorize it. This is not about wallowing in victimhood, it is about forensic analysis. You are not just experiencing hurt, you are compiling a vital dossier on the patterns of racial aggression you encounter. Here's how: when an incident occurs, immediately, or as soon as you have quiet reflection, name it, describe it, then assign it to one of 3 primary categories. Is this a racial power play? This is an overt or subtle assertion of dominance, a declaration of racial hierarchy, often intended to make you feel small, out of place, or subordinate simply because of your race. It's an attempt to establish racial pecking order. Or is it a racial gaslighting probe? This is the insidious attempt to make you doubt your perception of racism, to invalidate your reality. Are you sure it was about race? You're being too sensitive. I didn't mean it that way. This probes your boundaries, testing if you will internalize their denial and question your own rational assessment of a racially charged situation. It aims to make you distrust your own judgment, to leave you feeling isolated and confused. Finally, is it an act of performative racism? This is a comment or action made primarily for an approving audience, often to reinforce group norms, garner laughter, or signal allegiance to a particular, often racially insensitive or supremacist, worldview. It's less about directly assaulting you and more about playing to the gallery, using your racial identity as a prop or a punchline to solidify their own social standing. They are performing their racism, and you are merely the unfortunate stage for their act. By categorizing each event, you immediately shift its processing from your reactive emotional brain, where it triggers trauma and shame, to your analytical prefrontal cortex. This is a vital psychological intervention. You are no longer just feeling hurt, you are filing a psychological brief. This meticulous audit stops the emotional hemorrhage and builds your intelligence dossier on the precise, recurring patterns of racism you face, allowing you to see the matrix, not just feel its effects. You transition from being a passive recipient of racial aggression to an active, discerning analyst. This act of categorization reclaims power, turning the aggressor's weapon into data, transforming amorphous pain into actionable insight. This deliberate practice illuminates the invisible, making the previously unnameable undeniable. You are charting the landscape of your racial battles, understanding the enemy's tactics with precise, strategic clarity. The emotional overwhelm diminishes as you arm yourself with knowledge. Step 2. The Detachment Drill. Breaking the psychic hook of racism. Once you've successfully named and categorized the incident, you are ready for the crucial next step, the Detachment Drill. This is your personal psychic firewall, a 10-second mental ritual designed to sever the toxic connection, to prevent racist words or actions from embedding themselves in your psyche as personal truth or a judgment of your worth. When the racist comment or action hits, after your internal audit, immediately activate this drill. You visualize the racist words or actions not as a personal truth, but as a pre-recorded message, a scratchy, repetitive loop emanating from the ancient, defunct system of white supremacy or racial hierarchy. Imagine an impenetrable wall of silent, bulletproof glass instantly materializing between you and the sound, between you and the action. You see the lips moving, hear the echoes, but the venom cannot penetrate. For those critical 10 seconds, you breathe deeply, centering yourself, and acknowledge with unwavering conviction, this is not about my worth. This is the ideology of racism speaking through a mouthpiece. This is merely a manifestation of an archaic, desperate system struggling to maintain its illusion of power. This drill is not about denial, it's about disengagement. It's about refusing to internalize the poison. Racism, at its core, attempts to diminish your humanity, to implant shame, doubt, and inferiority. The detachment drill is your surgical tool to sever that psychic hook. It prevents the external aggression from becoming an internal wound. You are not absorbing, you are observing. You are not internalizing, you are externalizing. By consciously recognizing the source in ideology, not a reflection of your intrinsic value, you melt the rust of inferiority that the comment tries to deposit in your mind. This practice builds unshakable inner resilience. It reminds you, with every breath, that your worth is non-negotiable, inherent, and utterly untouched by the projections of a prejudiced mind. It's a declaration that your spirit will not be colonized by their hate. It establishes an energetic boundary that cannot be breached, creating a sanctuary of self-worth within you. Step 3. The narrative reclaim: writing your own story. At the end of each day, you will take one documented racist incident from your audit, perhaps the one that resonated most deeply or the one you feel you process least effectively, and you will rewrite the script. This isn't about rehearsing for a future confrontation, though preparedness can be a side benefit. This is about programming your subconscious, about healing the moments of frozen shock or internal turmoil that racism often leaves in its wake. You will write down the powerful, calm, one-sentence response you could have said, the dignified action you could have taken, the boundary you could have set, the space you could have reclaimed to affirm your humanity and uphold your authority. Perhaps it's a simple, "that comment is inappropriate," delivered with quiet power. Or a direct, "my expertise is not up for debate because of my race." Or even a decisive, silent walk away, radiating an aura of untouchable self-respect. The key is not to invent a combative scenario, but to construct a response rooted in your unshakable dignity. This daily practice is your decolonizing cleanse for your mental landscape. It flushes out the old story of racial victimhood and installs a new, vibrant story, sovereign racial identity. You are actively rewriting the neural pathways that colonialism and racism tried to carve into your mind, pathways that aim to link your racial identity with vulnerability, inferiority, or constant defense. Instead, you are forging new pathways that connect your racial identity with strength, clarity, and unassailable authority. You are training your subconscious to anticipate and generate responses that align with your deepest sense of self-worth. You are creating a library of dignified responses, so your automatic reaction is no longer one of frozen shock or internal collapse, but of grounded clarity and empowered action. This isn't about being combative, it's about being congruent with your power. It is about closing the loop of past incidents with a sense of completion and mastery, rather than leaving them open to fester. It's about taking back the stage from the aggressor and directing your own narrative, where you are always the protagonist of your own power, regardless of external attempts to diminish it. You are literally programming your own internal GPS to always navigate towards self-respect and racial authority. The power of your protocol. These 3 steps, executed with consistency and intention, cut off the power supply to the internalized racism factory. By categorizing, you move the racist event from the emotional brain, where it causes trauma, to the analytical prefrontal cortex, where it becomes data. You dismantled the bomb of shame before it detonates. The detachment drill installs the psychic firewall against racial toxicity. It acts as an impenetrable barrier, melting the rust of inferiority that the comment tries to deposit in your mind, ensuring the poison of prejudice cannot reach your core being. It reinforces the truth that their racial bias is a reflection of their limitation, not of your value. The narrative reclaim is the decolonizing cleanse for your mental landscape. It flushes out the old story of racial victimhood and installs the new story of sovereign racial identity. You are literally rewriting the neural pathways colonialism and racism tried to carve, replacing them with pathways of resilience, strength, and unwavering self-respect. You are not just reacting to racism, you are actively, consciously, and strategically building a new, liberated self, thought by thought. You can start step 1, the Racial Incident Audit, the moment this video ends. What are you waiting for? Another year of silent corrosion from microaggressions, slowly eroding your confidence and peace? Another incident where you leave a room feeling racially diminished, carrying the weight of unaddressed slights? The time to reclaim your mental sovereignty from racism is not tomorrow. It is in the next hour. This protocol is not a magic pill, it is a discipline. It only works if you act, if you commit to protecting your own psyche, to being the architect of your own unshakable racial dignity. This is your daily rebellion, your personal revolution against the forces that seek to diminish you. Begin now. This journey we've shared, this deep dive into the mechanisms of racism, has prepared you not just to understand, but to actively resist and heal. But this understanding, this individual empowerment, reaches its full potential when it catalyzes collective strength. Racism survives and thrives in silence and isolation, making individuals feel alone in their struggle, fostering the illusion that their experiences are singular, not systemic. Break that isolation. Share this video. Send it to the person you know who carries that same weary look after a racist encounter, the one who needs this blueprint for psychic self-defense. By sharing, you are not just distributing content, you are creating a network of the racially aware and resilient, a community where shared knowledge becomes shared power. You are amplifying the signal that we are not alone in decoding this matrix, and that together, our understanding becomes an unyielding force. Every like on this video is more than a simple click, it's a signal, a digital declaration. It tells the algorithm, and more importantly, it tells the world, that knowledge which dismantles racism matters. It shouts that there is an army of people choosing to see the racial matrix for what it is and actively working to disarm it in their own lives and their communities. Leave your like not just as an agreement, but as a visible mark of solidarity in this understanding, a beacon for others seeking the path to liberation. I need you to make this real, to ground this profound shift in your daily experience. Comment below, protocol activated, when you commit to your 7-day racial incident audit. Let's fill these comments with names, with resolve, with a collective promise to ourselves and to each other. Let the world see that we are not alone in this struggle, but a collective waking up, building tools, and enacting change. This comments section will become a living testimony, a shared space of commitment. Also, leave your questions on applying this protocol, on refining these practices. I will be here, engaging, supporting, and building this community with you, one empowered individual at a time. And finally, save this video. Pin it. Bookmark it. This is your manual for psychic self-defense against racism. This isn't a one-time watch, it's a living guide. When the world tries to sell you the old story of racial hierarchy again, when a microaggression tries to slip past your defenses, come back and rewatch Step 2, the Detachment Drill. Let this be your anchor of dignity, your steady reminder that your worth is non-negotiable, eternal, and inherent. This is your personal weapon against the psychological warfare of racism, a constant reinforcement of your sovereignty. The choice is now binary, clear, and urgent. You can continue to be a battlefield for a racial war you didn't start, allowing the insidious mechanisms of racism to erode your spirit and dictate your sense of self-worth, or you can become the sovereign architect of your own racial peace and power. You have the blueprint to disarm racism in your mind, the practical steps to heal old wounds and prevent new ones from taking root. The tools are in your hands, not merely to survive, but to thrive, to flourish in your authentic racial identity, unburdened by external projections. We are not just healing ourselves from racial trauma, we are building a new language of unassailable worth, a language rooted in self-respect, clarity, and collective strength. Now go, and speak it, live it, and embody it, for the world is waiting for your liberated voice.